A very real divide is rocking Australian netball right now, which leaves the future of the sport in serious doubt. Martin Devlin looks at the sponsorship scandal in this week's Playing the Ball. Martin, thanks for taking the time. Do you want to just give us a bit of a recap as to what this is all about?
Yeah, column is titled, corporate dollars versus social conscience, and what was happening in Australian netball. And since I've written the column, there's been a couple of subsequent events that have happened, but it all centred around an Aboriginal woman called Donnell Wellham, who is going to become, and has since become, the first Indigenous Australian woman to play for the Diamonds, the national team of Australia, in 2 decades. I think the third only in 80 years. And before the England series, she expressed, or actually before the Constellation Cup against New Zealand, she expressed some concerns that she had about wearing the naming rights sponsor Hancock prospecting across the front of the Diamonds netball dresses, given the fact that that company has a pretty despicable reputation Australian-wide. It's a big mining company, not only in the way that they have, I suppose I can use a word like exploited the people, the Indigenous people, the land and everything like that. There's all the complexities involving those issues. More about, as far as she was concerned, founder of that company, a guy called Lang Hancock, who has been dead for 30 years, but 4 decades ago just made some of the most reprehensible, hideous, racist remarks about Aboriginal people. I don't want to go into those, but she was obviously still very deeply hurt by those. And it's very difficult when you're not on the receiving end of those to actually even put yourself in that perspective of how they do affect you and can affect you for a very long time. And she didn't want that. And then her teammates rallied around behind her. And now, it's a bit murky as to whether or not they actually went to Netball Australia, the team, and said that none of us are going to wear that name across our dresses. We don't. Nobody's actually kind of admitted to either side of that. But the upshot is that they played clean skins against New Zealand. As a result of that, Gina Reinhardt, who's the daughter of Hancock, who owns that mining company, said that she's going to pull her $15 million sponsorship. She also pulled the sponsorship from the West Coast Fever side, which is a netball franchise side in Australia. And Netball Australia, $11 million in the hole, can hardly afford to lose this kind of sponsorship. It's not readily replaceable. Netball isn't the kind of sport in Australia, even though we kind of think we have these rows in New Zealand about how, women's sport deserves this sponsorship, should get this. Well, that's all fine and well, and it's not something I disagree with, but you've still got to actually have somebody on the other side of it writing a check and handing it to you. Gina Reinhardt was that person. She's withdrawn the sponsorship. But I suppose the column is around, again, a lot of empathy for Donnell Wellham, but at the same time, Hamish, I do kind of wonder whether or not this has been handled in the best possible way. And if all of those players, putting her to one side for a second, but all the rest of the Australian players and their management and Netball Australia couldn't have done something a bit more adult, like sit around and actually figure this thing out rather than turn it into a Instagram media firestorm.
Is that how it got the traction that it did, do you think, by the way that they so publicly did this?
Well, if that's the case, it's very ill thought, and it's stupid. It's plainly stupid. It's cutting the nose off to spite the face. If that's the case. Again, I have a lot of empathy for Donnell Wellham, and I don't disagree that it's a very valid argument and very valid cause. At the same time, though, there are practicalities involved, and what you're doing, and on this I'm talking to the other netball, the rest of the Diamonds players, is you're putting the whole sport in peril. The whole sport. That's not only you and your professional jobs, that's every single kid who wants to play netball in Australia. And so if you're going to do that, well, you better be damn sure that what you're doing is for exactly the right reasons, and it's the right way to go about it. What I'm saying in the column is I don't doubt that the reasons are right. I certainly disagree with the way that they've gone about it, though, because at the moment, you're now in a situation where they don't have any money. Sport just doesn't exist by waking up in the morning and looking at the bank balance and hoping that it's there. If you don't have any cash, that sport will die. It's in real financial stress and strife at the moment. And I just kind of think it's one of those things that, as I said, a bunch of adults you would hope could have sat around and actually talked about this and maybe come, to a different conclusion. Gina Reinhardt, we've spoken about this before, Hamish, when you're dealing with people in the corporate sector who are billionaires, they don't get to be billionaires by being nice people. They've trodden on toes. They've ridden over a few people. I'll hesitate to use the terms exploited or ripped off or anything like that because I don't know the ins and outs, but you don't get to make $1 billion by being Mr. and Mrs. Nicey Nice. Most of the time what's happened is somebody suffered as a result of that. So, one of the points I make, and this is where the hypocrisy of the argument comes in. If the Diamonds players were that serious about their politics, well, then they wouldn't have gone to the Commonwealth Games, because as soon as you mention the word Commonwealth, well, that just absolutely and utterly implies colonisation, does it not? and the imposition of another person's culture and beliefs on an Indigenous bunch of people. That's happened all around the world. So if you're going to pull the handbrake up Australian netball, I'm talking about the Diamonds players here, you can't pick and choose. You've either got to do it or you don't do it. Stand up for your argument, stand up for what you believe. However, it was okay for them. Look, it's the same as I introduced Pat Cummins into this argument as well, the Australian cricket captain, who's made himself a small fortune off Australian cricket and the contracts he's had, who now won't appear in Alinta Energy ads because he's a climate change warrior all of a sudden. A day after announcing that, the Australian team played in Perth at the T20 World Cup. Not sure he rode his push bike across the Nullarbor for that. He normally flies first class when he's not driving his gas-guzzling Range Rover.
It's a complicated issue, isn't it? Though, how do you compare, say, this approach versus? I'm not sure if you saw over the weekend the Socceroos team who put out the reason. They did a video why they're still going to the Qatar World Cup. Yeah.
And if you look back through previous columns that I've done, one of the ones was about FIFA actually standing up, on behalf of the inclusivity that they promote and being wanting the whole world to be in love and be happy, standing up to Qatar themselves. That message should have come from the World Football Organization. Interesting that the Qatari authorities, for the first time, actually say that they applaud that message. So they obviously know the heat that they're going to be under. And this is where, again, FIFA came down here and did a World Cup tour. God, we had the Justice Minister fawning all over them. I mean, this is one of the most corrupt organisations that's ever walked the planet. Let's not forget that. The fact that the World Cup is in Qatar is an absolute joke for a start. So don't hold FIFA up on any kind of pedestal. But I applauded what the Australian men's Socceroos team did. Look, athletes these days, they want to use their platform for social good, and that's all good. Again, as I say in the column, I don't have a problem with it. What I have a problem with is short-sightedness and whether or not the way that they're going about it is actually going to make a point, but also be beneficial to the sport, beneficial to whoever is actually going to play it in the future. And as far as the netballers go, I'm not sure that that's the case.
Any signs of a new sponsor for Netball Australia? Potentially a good opportunity for a business, isn't it?
Well, this is the other thing, isn't it? When the Black Ferns, and I wrote a column about this at the start of the year too, when the Black Ferns were going through their review and everything, I said there is no better time now for a corporate giant to jump on this team. Fabulous team, great players, great stories. Be the first to put your hand up and go, no, I'm going to support them. And again, here is corporate Australia. Hear that? See, that's the sound of silence. Whereas, wouldn't you actually expect, somebody, one of these banks who continually tell us about how wonderfully social they are and how much they do for the community. ANZ, oh my God, we gave $200 to a kid so we could continue to play cricket. They made $2 billion last year. So where are these companies when you actually think, here's a great opportunity to stand up for Denell Wellham, for Indigenous people in Australia? Where are they? Great question. Where are they?
Interesting topic. Martin, thanks very much for your time.
Always, mate.